NBA. Kyrie Irving has until June 29th, so we are tick to decide whether he will opt out of the final year of his contract and become a free agent. Yesterday on First Take, Kendrick Perkins talking about what a Kyrie exit might mean for Kevin Durant.
If I'm KD and the Brooklyn Nets don't get this deal done with Kyrie Irving, and Kyrie Irving leaves the Brooklyn Nets to sign with somebody else like the Lakers and LeBron James, if I'm Kevin Durant, I want out.
Okay, so what does that mean? It means that absolutely everything hangs in the balance over the next week and a half. And so we got Legs, we got Zach Lowe, and Windy, I'm starting with you. What, as the clock ticks towards June 29th, that's a week from tomorrow, where do we stand between Kyrie and the Nets?
Yeah, Greeny. So late last week, a couple of teams were reached out to let them know that Kyrie Irving may end up being on the market. It wasn't a complete and total surprise because it was understood that the Nets could play hardball. Kyrie has come on the record and said, I plan to be back. And the Nets weren't really under any obligation to offer him a full guaranteed max contract. So most of the league is reading this as a leverage play. Kyrie trying to leverage the Nets into giving him something that he wants on a new contract, whether he opts out and signs a new deal or extends his current contract. The reality is that he doesn't have a lot of options. And what this will probably really come down to is if he is willing to actually opt out of his contract and leave $36 million on the table and open up the window to actually go someplace else without needing the Nets to trade him there. That is really the game of chicken here. If the Nets believe he's willing to do that and potentially leave money on the table, they may be more willing to guarantee more money. If they call his bluff and he ends up staying in his contract, then the Nets would have good position. But at the end of the day, I think most of the league believes eventually he will come back to the Nets. It's just a matter of working out the deal.
Well, I mean, the deal is the complicated part, and with Kyrie, everything tends to get complicated. Zach Lowe, your thoughts?
The Nets, the most talked about dissected team to win one playoff series in 3 years. I'm so glad we're back here, Greeny, talking about this group. Look, Windy's right. Here's the bottom line. Kyrie's trade value because of his own absences has never been lower. And the teams that might want Kyrie Irving via trade, teams that are desperate to win now, teams that are desperate for another ball handler, they don't have anything that would interest the Nets team that, as Perk talked about, needs to win right now because they have a top 12 player of all time sitting there like, what the heck happened to me? So a trade is going to be very difficult if Kyrie opts in. And as Windy said, the wild card here is he really willing to opt out? Is he really willing to opt out and sign somewhere for the mid-level exception, which is $10 million a year, instead of the $36 million player option that he has? If that's the case, and you never know with Kyrie, then the whole league opens up for him. And yeah, that's DEFCON 1 for the Nets. That's the greatest team that never was, is now officially broken up with 2 stars rather than 3. I agree with Windy. I still feel like there are creative ways for the Nets and Kyrie to work this out. But with Kyrie, you just never know.
I had to remind myself when you said 2 stars that they have Ben Simmons. Not that we've seen him, but he is theoretically a member of that Brooklyn team. I had to remember who you were talking about for a minute. All right, Legler, what? I mean, so now you're sitting back, you're watching all of this. This is a team that got swept out of the first round of the playoffs as unceremoniously as you possibly can be. What do you make of all this?
I think I agree that, look, at the end of the day, this is probably a leverage tactic for Kyrie Irving. He's probably going to opt in. Will he end up staying in Brooklyn for the duration of whatever he signs? Probably not. I think Kyrie Irving's a guy that gets itches. He gets itches to be other places. He's not a guy, I think, that has been particularly reliable or dependable. So I don't know where it leads, but I do feel like he's going to opt in, and I do feel like in some ways Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving need each other right now. They need this to be their destiny. I know Kyrie Irving is a champion. Kevin Durant's a 2-time champion, but the circumstances around both of those situations, Kyrie really living in LeBron's shadow and then Kevin Durant joining a great team, I think this is the one thing that they really need each other for. The one thing I keep asking myself, though, is when you look at Kyrie Irving, we all talk about his talent all the time. That word comes out just immediately. And then I look at his track record in recent history. Do you know he's played in as many playoff games in the last 5 years as he did basically the one season he won a championship in Cleveland? In 2 of those postseasons in the last 5 years, he didn't even participate. So you're talking about a guy that hasn't been reliable or dependable, and he hasn't been on teams good enough to win anything. And yet we just continue to talk about his talent because it's so explosive and electric. I don't know if they're going to put together in Brooklyn, but my guess is he's going to opt in, and then we'll see where we go from there, depending on how the season plays out.
And so you bring up the interesting side of all of this, Windy, and to me that is the Kevin Durant of it all. It is worth noting again that the teams those two guys left, Durant leaving Golden State, Kyrie leaving Boston, those two teams just met for the championship while the Nets were getting swept out of the playoffs and being team turmoil here. So what, if anything, do we know about where I mean, we know that KD is busy tweeting at Charles Barkley. What else do we think he thinks about all of this?
Kevin Durant will be 34 next season. He is not looking for any sort of rebuild. He wants a team that's ready for a championship. And so I know that the Lakers fans got very excited yesterday at the possibility of Kyrie being a Laker. But I can tell you there is no interest from the Brooklyn Nets in a trade that would bring Russell Westbrook for Kyrie Irving, because that would not advance the Nets' title hopes, and that would undercut what Kevin Durant did last year, which was sign a 4-year, $200 million extension. So you can forget about that. The only player that the Nets would have interest in the Lakers in a Kyrie Irving trade would be Anthony Davis, and I am told that Anthony Davis is not available in such a scenario. So the only way that Kyrie is going to be a Laker is if he goes there in free agency, which he'd have to leave $30 million on the table, and I just do not see that happening. The other team I think that you'd look at would be the New York Knicks. The Knicks do not have appreciable salary cap space. So one of two things would have to happen. One is they'd have to begin trading players off immediately within the next few days so that they would have cap space available to sign Kyrie in early July, and then they would undercut where their team would be. The second thing is they could call Brooklyn and try to work out a trade. But again, I'm not sure that there's anybody on the Knicks roster that if traded to the Nets would make Kevin Durant feel comfortable about competing for a championship next year. So this is Kyrie's leverage play. Kyrie's leverage play isn't really that he's going to walk to the Lakers. Kyrie's leverage play is, you can't make Kevin Durant happy if I leave, so make Kevin Durant happy, sign me, and let's get back to work.
It's fascinating. And by the way, kudos to whatever production assistant cut that set of highlights there known as Knicks struggling highlights. If you really looked closely at the plays we just showed you, that was fascinating to watch. Zach Lowe, how about it? How about, let's go back to what Big Perk said. He said if Kyrie, one way or another, if the result of all this is that he's out of there, where does that leave Kevin Durant?
Look, if this ends up as Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, who hasn't played in a year and didn't suit up for the Nets in the playoffs after all the rumblings that he might suit up for Game 3 and then Game 4. If it's Durant, Ben Simmons, and like some role players that they get in exchange for Kyrie, or nothing that they get in exchange for Kyrie if he leaves in free agency, I think you start to get calls to the Brooklyn Nets from other teams saying, hey, is this guy available? What exactly are you doing there? What exactly are you building there? You had James Harden, you had Kyrie Irving, and now you have what? And Kevin Durant is sitting there as an all-time great player, a guy who we were talking about as recently as 3 months ago as the single best player in the NBA still, until Giannis kind of took that throne from him, sitting there saying, is this the way that I'm ending my career? And maybe Kevin Durant doesn't care. Kevin Durant has made his own choices for his own personal reasons. I'm not in the business of telling players what they should and shouldn't do. Clearly, he was not fulfilled in Golden State, so he left to try to build something new. That has blown up so far, and we'll just have to see what happens.
All right, Legs, put a finishing touch on it here. Durant, his position in all of this, the Nets sort of hanging in the balance. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, listen, Kevin Durant, people are going to always question why he left Golden State, and I think that's because the perspective of most people that say that is, well, all that should matter to guys is winning, and clearly that was going to be an easier place to win. And I've always contended, no, that's not the only thing that matters to great players. Winning certainly matters. You want it on your resume. Well, he's done that. he wasn't fulfilled. He didn't even look like he was having fun by the end of that second championship season. So there are other things that matter. And I think Kevin Durant put himself in a position. He wants to win more, but he wanted to do it in a different way, in a different place, a different style with different guys around him. And that's what he went to Brooklyn for. So if Kyrie Irving were to leave, and again, I don't think he's going to, at least not here initially. Who knows where this leads halfway through the season? And the trading deadline, maybe something else. It looks like something else to this organization. I think Kevin Durant believes he can still get it done there with Kyrie Irving, with Ben Simmons coming into the fold, and whatever role players they can put out there. I think he thinks he's good enough to do it. I don't think he's lost a night's sleep over leaving Golden State because he had different reasons for wanting to do that.
That's probably true. And yet, every time Charles Barkley comes on this show and says anything about it, KD certainly seems to be quite put off by that narrative. You will hear that coming up a little bit later on this program as we continue. Yeah.